firstly, thanks so much for being able to have a chat, having the time, and thanks for patience in rearranging once, maybe, or twice. So thank you very much for that.
You did it on deadline day, I think, Daniel, last time.
Yeah, I'd actually, because I'm trying to speak to lots of people in the sports and entertainment space generally, I'd asked Sarah to go through it, and then the day, I think the day or so beforehand, I was like, Sarah, you've organised a talk for not a good idea.
No, it was quite busy that day, I think, for you.
Well, it was actually one of our more quieter ones, as you can imagine, because there often had much stuff going on. But at the same time, it was actually it was good in a way, because there's quite a lot of other stuff going on, as you can imagine, generally. So it wasn't the worst thing that I was up and pressurized for something like that, actually, because it's as you guys I'm sure know in different ways, it's not that much fun when you're up against a very difficult deadline. People are expecting you to do things pretty quickly.
Yeah, sure. Anyway,
so
are you all well? I mean, Jackie and I have been speaking. Obviously, you well, Daniel? Yes,
thank you. All doing fine. I've come into the office today a little bit just to break things up, actually, is the truth. So my two girls and my wife Holly are at home, and then Holly's done an amazing job of doing homeschooling for my two little ones. And then they're actually on half term this week. So I'm just sort of trying to balance work and everything in between, really. But I think we're, generally all right. How about the both of you?
Well, one of the only few things about being a certain age is I've had my jab. So both my husband and I are now feeling a little bit more confident. Obviously, we're still masking up, but we feel a little bit less vulnerable. And so that's good. So some glimmers of hope, I think, at least for us on the COVID front. Jackie?
All good. Yeah, all good. Just, beavering away. Yeah, doing lots of homework on things. This quiet time you can start to do things that perhaps you didn't have time before. So yeah, it's been good.
No, it's really nice. Well, firstly, thanks, for, as I said, for being able to have the chat. The reason really is also because I've chatted to you guys, obviously, at the conferences and things that we put on, and I've really enjoyed having our conversations. But also because one of the things that that I realised, obviously, before lockdown, but obviously when I did at the beginning of lockdown, was this idea of a careers talk that I gave about how to get into the sports industry and how to, do the things that you want to do and engage your passions or your curiosities. And as a result of, I'm sure it's the same with you guys, quite a long time of people asking you, how do you be a football agent? How do you get into, in other specific sectors, if it's music or more TV or sports or, fashion or whatever else it might be. And so I've been writing over the last year or so a sort of how-to manual, a relatively shortish book, just around how some of the things that have helped me practically could then maybe apply for other people as well. But in a way, what I didn't want to do is just live within my own echo chamber of the things that I think work well for me, and just to go out into the wider market of people that I've enjoyed speaking to, just to hear some of your experiences, life experiences around a few different topics. So I'm not sure if you saw the calendar invite, which just contains a few of the ideas and issue and thoughts that I had around those type of areas. And I'm going to stop talking in a second, you'd be pleased to know. But it's really just to sort of gauge your understanding and your story is the truth on a few different areas. The one thing that I always say, and what people I'm sure will say to you is, for example, just to start us off, is, I really want to be a football agent, or I want to get into football or sport because I, love watching the game and I love doing this, etc., etc. But what people I think have a harder time doing is then converting that curiosity, that passion, into something which is a bit more substantive. And the way that I usually say it, which I know you guys have embraced in lots of different ways over the years, is, building your knowledge and building your network accordingly. So I'd just be really fascinated to hear, if that's been a conscious thing, if that's been an unconscious thing, if that's something you've learned, if that's something that's just been ingrained in you, that's been taught to you from other people. How have you gone about doing that over the period of your working lives?
May I kick off? Is that okay? And I'll kick off with an observation rather than an answer, if that's all right with you, Daniel. And that observation is, when I read your, what you were trying to achieve, it seemed to me that there was a kind of underlying assumption or premise that that life is a bit of a production line, that, you start with this passion and this drive and this ambition to get to a goal. And then there's some, building work to be done, your phrase, a sort of process, materials that have to be just applied in a certain way. And you will end up with the product that you set out to achieve. And that it all seemed quite a rational thing. And you were simply asking us for, the building blocks for the construction. But I have a slightly sort of more random view of life. I think stuff happens. And part of what you can do is complemented or not by what happens externally. So there's this complex interplay with the things that you control and can work at, and I think that's what you're emphasizing. But the bit that's missing in my mind is the external things that happen to you, good, bad, or ugly. Life is a bunch of different things, and if you're going to take advantage of them, somehow, if you're not born with an ability to recognize opportunities, it's great to put yourself in the way of, people who will help you say, this is an opportunity, why don't you? Or if you're not very good at anything and you don't really know where you're going, it's often external things that happen to you or people you meet that give you ideas and give you inspiration. So I start with this sort of an answer, which says, it's a bit of a mixed bag, life. It's not a linear conveyor belt where you just pick up tools and materials as you go along, and in the end you get where you actually wanted to get to right at the beginning. And I certainly didn't do that in my life. Anyway, that was just an observation, and I'll step back so that Jacquie can reply.
Can I just ask then, just briefly on one thing, Carol, just while you've got your momentum, because I was really interested before Jacquie comes in on that last comment, which is, and things haven't worked out that way in your life to a degree. Now, with obviously going into particular things that you feel comfortable going into, I completely agree. And I'm really interested in that whole, you can plan and prepare for certain things, but then life gets in the way and throws you lots of different curveballs to take you lots of different directions, positive, negative, whatever else it might be. But what you talked about, which I was really fascinated about, was almost this idea of a growth mindset, which a lot of people have written about. Two brilliant female authors, Carol Dweck and Angela Duckworth, that I'd really recommend. And they talk about that positive mindset of thinking about, when you think about yourself, that you're not defined by your failures. You're not defined by the things that necessarily go wrong, but you're always trying to control the things that are within your control to make the best out of what might sometimes be negative situations, I guess. So going back to your question about, it literally going, life going like this and not a line like this. How have then you coped with, in a positive way, trying to establish that growth mindset and that idea of almost like, as you said, preparing for the unexpected?
I'm not entirely sure I can answer that with a how to do it answer. I echo your views, which I either read about or heard you speak about on a podcast. I echo the views that say, be thirsty for knowledge, effectively, cultivate an inquiring mind, put yourself in the way of opportunities by keeping an open mind and talking to a lot of people, because I've certainly found in my life that people, I've kind of bumped into people. I know it's common wisdom to say you make your own luck, but I feel I've genuinely been lucky. I had no idea what I was going to do when I left university. I was a generalist. I still am a generalist, but I was at university just before the Britain entered the common market. Remember the common market? It was a long time ago. And I met people there. I had no idea why I was in there, other than I, had been selected to be an intern from university graduates in the first year of Britain's membership. Anyway, to cut a long story short, I met some fantastic people there who really inspired me because they were visionaries. I wasn't a visionary, but I met people who had something that I thought was immensely satisfying to them. It's high ideal stuff after the war. Obviously, the common market was set up to keep peace in the world, not to protect fishing rights. But I met people who had vision, and they were absolutely driven and motivated. And I thought, wow, this is really something special. What drives them forward? Because I didn't have any of that myself. And out of that building, working relationship with a lot of those kind of people, I got motivated myself. So while I couldn't honestly say there was something I did, I certainly recognized something that I wanted to do when I met it. And so I think coming back to the beginning, keeping an open mind is slightly the opposite of living your dreams, because I didn't have any, but be ready to take signals that come in from outside and from people who inspire you. Take up some signals that might lead you somewhere that you hadn't thought of before. And those things happen randomly to everyone all the time. But if you're focused very solely on that linear pathway to get to your driven ambition, because you're passionate about football, sport, music, or whatever, you only have to work out what the steps are and you'll get there, because success and rewards come from all sorts of other situations. Anyway, I'll stop there.
Jacquie, any thoughts from your side at all?
So, I guess I started out in a very sort of competitive family set, which I guess then led to all the different things that I've done in my life. Primarily, I've been in a sales environment, so you're only as good as your last sale, etc. And that has given me a plethora of skills over the years that I've been able to transfer into a passion, which happens to be football. And I guess that competitive nature that I have has been harnessed. It's not always been something that has always got the results that I wanted it to, especially in the football world. So I've had to learn as I go and adjust accordingly, and to think about the environment around me is changing, so you have to apply different tools and techniques and things like that. So I'm a little bit more the opposite of Carol, which is probably why we work quite well, because our minds are thinking in different ways, and then there is a common value that we both share, which is kind of why we work so well together. I think my ethos has always been win more than you lose. So in that sense, throw yourself into as many scenarios and situations as you can that can give you that personal growth. But I'm a little bit more I analyze the risk first, and then I might be a little bit more tentative in terms of the way I go into it, whereas Carol's the opposite. I think she just has a look and then throws herself into something. I kind of learn as I go along, and then what I do is I either detach things that are no good to me, or I attach things that are good to me in that situation or in that given moment. And I'm very much, we'll probably laugh, but I'm a cultivator. So I love to build things from scratch, and I like to sow, to cultivate, to harvest. But primarily I look at the environment around me, bit similar to what we do in the marketplace, and I kind of go, okay, how can we build this in a way that we will, that we can add value to what we're trying to do. So that's me really. I'm a builder.
if I could just briefly follow one of those points on what Jackie said in that last contribution was what kind of person she is. She's very competitive. And I think one of the other things, apart from keeping an open mind, that I would want to suggest to younger folk is know yourself. I mean, it's really important that you know who you are and what you're good at, because sometimes, you know, what you're good at will actually make you successful. And in Jackie's case, it clearly has. She's highly competitive and doesn't let go. She's very dogged. And if you're someone who isn't quite sure what you're good at, other people will tell you. It's very good to ask other people what your skills, not what your qualifications are. I mean, that's very easy, but what your talents are. I think women are very good at certain types of leadership, and I think, you know, other people will tell you whether you're achieving things by a non-traditional route. Jackie's someone who leads from the rear. I mean, she's been a football manager for how many years, Jackie?
A few, yeah.
But if you look at the tributes, suddenly someone's putting tributes up to you on Facebook, Jackie. I don't know whether you've seen them, saying, you know, that everything had to be better than just okay, and that you know, the people you managed completely would have walked through walls for you. But that doesn't sit in a textbook. You certainly aren't someone who barks orders or only rewards success. And I think if you know your character and you know what you're good at, that should be part of your career planning, I feel. Not just, you know, which qualification do I need to get that job, but am I going to be any good at it? And be realistic if you're not going to be good at something, because you could be incredibly good at something different or parallel, or that provides an auxiliary service into the, you know, the thing that you thought you would end up doing. So I think part of the open mind is also knowing yourself and, you know, finding out where your strengths really lie, because in the end, they will probably satisfy you. It's a paradox, because you think you're only going to be satisfied by achieving the thing you want, but actually you can be satisfied by being good at something and successful because you're good at it. Anyway, enough on that.
No, I really like that idea. And I think that's two ways, and maybe a question for both of you generally. In your experience, did it take you a while to find out what you were good at in order then to unlock what then you wanted to do as a result?
You first, Jackie. I've been talking too much.
I think in terms of what we're doing today, I mean, I had like a bit of an epiphany when I was on a dog walk. I come out of managing and being part of a football club, non-league football club, but a club that was starting to sort of shift through the gears in terms of the women's side. And, you know, I had all these things, all these, you know, traits, qualities, whatever, but they weren't being utilized. And I felt, oh, that's just odd. I feel odd here. You know, there's a void. I need to, what can I do? And on my dog walk, I kind of had this epiphany that I thought, you know what, I can use all of those skills that I've learned to help players get contracts in football clubs. And I thought, well, I'm going to just pass it by Carol to see whether she thinks I'm a complete lunatic or not. So I rang Carol and I said, look, if this is a silly idea, just talk, you know, tell me. So I said, what do you think about this idea? Anyway, she didn't poo-poo it. She said, yeah, I think that's great. And that's all I needed to hear. And then from there, we started to shape our business into what it is today. And it continues to change as the environment changes, because it's changing a lot in women's football. So, yeah, so that's kind of how that kind of all came about and all started. And I think it was a bit of frustration of not being able to use those skills that I've learned over so many years. And I felt like that at the centre of all of it, I could help female football players, you know, flourish in the careers that they've got ahead. So that was always the center of what I was trying to do.
And to add to that and to answer your question, I think it does take time before you actually, find out where your place is. And I won't mention my early experiences other than I've been through very meandering kind of set of jobs in employment and ended up running a business. But it took me a long time. I won't bore you with all the details. It's more fun if I talk about my children. My daughter left university having studied archaeology, completely useless subject, except if you're going to be an archaeologist, and then wanted to be either a physiotherapist or a spy. And I was interested, Jackie, to hear Emma Hayes, who's the manager of Chelsea Women, very successful, also applied to MI5 and MI6, and my daughter did the same. She then went to study, after university, went to study A-levels in biology so that she could be the physiotherapist. And now she's a project manager at a digital media company, very happy, very successful at her job, because what she's good at is, I think, a bit what I'm good at, which is managing and organising. And it took me probably about 10 years or so till I found that. I went to business school because somebody recommended it. It was there weren't very many business schools open when I did my MBA, but and then when I got my first job, I discovered that's really what I was good at. If you don't mind me a little blow at a trumpet, I'm a generalist, and I think managers who are too specialist don't always see the big picture. And I think when I found that I did like to see a big picture and hold the reins while other people did the work, which is a great way to be a manager, I found my métier, if you like. It did take a long time. So I think if you're starting out and try a range of things, you always learn something from every experience you have, or you can do. And then if you're fortunate, you will find something that really ticks a lot of boxes, and they're not always ones you see it right at the beginning of your career.
Can I ask then the next thought that I had on that, and Jackie, maybe you could offer some, both of you are certainly about to add some value on it, but one of the things that I try, and I'm thinking about making a very core element of the book, or maybe it won't come with the book anyway, but my explorations is this idea that I don't think is very fashionable, but I think hopefully we'll make a bit of a recovery at some point, which is ultimately it's not about us as individuals, that actually not only do I find that I get the most satisfaction and inner warmth, or whatever you want to call it, from helping others and giving value to others and pushing people along their path, that one of the big elements of what I'm trying to put about in the book is, we're obviously talking about our own careers, but actually I think a lot of the time what people don't consider is the other person on the other side of whatever it is you're looking to do yourself. If it's, I need work experience, or I want a promotion, or I want something to go well for myself, usually the narrative can sometimes be, well, I need to speak to this person about that to see how they can help me, rather than I think sometimes thinking about actually how I, as a first instance, can go about helping others. And I was fascinated, Carol, in your analysis there of leadership and managerial roles. And again, Jackie, when you were talking about leadership, but obviously in your capacities too, about actually what active leadership or active management actually is. To me, it feels like, in my role in my firm as well, is actually being as empathetic sometimes as possible to the need of others. So I'd be really interested in maybe your views on that, and how helping others helps in the end helps yourself as well.
That's for you, Jackie.
So I've always been very player centric. So as a manager, I was player centric. So everything starts with the player. in the middle of the circle, if you like, and then you build outwards from there. Because, you know, if you want to develop whatever you're trying to develop, it has to start with that individual, not you. And you get so many more rewards from doing that and having that kind of philosophy. And I guess one thing it does do is it creates a sense of ownership for everybody, for that individual that you put at the heart of the team, or the members of the team, and then work the way out. Your kind of circle gets bigger with whoever you need in it to make that team, that squad successful. So our ethos is still, for us, you know, clients at the center of what we do, because it's not about us, it's all about them, and providing them with the support and the tools and all the things they need to become successful. Always automatically, you know, if they're successful, you become successful as a kind of a subsection of that. So yeah, everything you do, I think you have to have the plans and strategies in place to be able to allow them to do their best work, and to try and find an environment and build an environment that they can flourish in. Because if they are in a safe, trustworthy environment that they can perform at their highest level, then again, you know, you're in a very successful scenario there. So yeah, them at the heart every time.
Carol?
Yeah, no, I was just thinking of a follow on from what Jackie was saying. It's not quite the same angle, but working with people that you want to help is not always easy, because some of them don't recognize they need help. Some of them come with a more confrontational set of, you know, attitudes. And another reason Jackie and I get on quite well is we're both gardeners, and we found it very helpful to think of our interaction with clients and other people in terms of planting seeds in fertile ground, we hope, but planting seeds and standing back and allowing nature to do its stuff. And if they're going to germinate, those seeds will take root and then grow into something. And we've seen that is a way of helping people who either don't want the help, or they don't think they need the help, or need to actually get motivated themselves. When people take ownership of something, it becomes theirs by definition, and they will become empowered to do something with the idea. So I think that's the way of, maybe it's just a tactic or a trick of the trade to help people achieve, but I think it is very rewarding to put that top of the list. And as Jackie said, that's what we try and do. Not that we want to take the glory or the fame or even the money. Not much money in the women's game for ourselves. We want our clients to succeed, because that's a satisfaction of the highest order. It is for me. I mean, other people might have, you know, achievement is their highest order, and they could both be very satisfying things to do. But I do think you're right. It's a very significant part of career development that you, at least a good part of the time, are not putting back. That sounds a bit too philanthropical. Is that a word? But that you're doing something for other people, which in turn will reward you.
I think that's right. And one of the things almost interconnected with that and again, I'd be really interested in your views on it generally, is it sprung to mind a few years ago after a book that I'd read called, it's not the greatest title, but I still really enjoyed it, called How to Win Friends and Influence People.
Oh, yes.
And
Dale Carnegie.
Yeah, Dale Carnegie.
Yeah.
And the reason why I loved the book so much was that he gave a lot of time to this idea of active listening.
Yeah.
And the need, in a way, not to be more interested than interesting, if that's the right way of putting it. Be more interested in the other than convey yourself as being as interesting as you possibly can be. And that idea of active listening, of garnering a lot of information, of understanding the perspective of the other, then leads to a lot of very interesting outcomes and outputs. For example, joining the dots, getting a bigger picture of the wider environment, understanding people in a much better and more holistic way. Again, I don't want to put you on the spot on it in terms of listening, but listening to me has been a massive a benefit, more so than I used to do, to a large degree, maybe over the last about 6 or 7 years of my career. Does that resonate at all with either of you?
I mean, I completely understand. I'm quite observational, so I'll have a look at, you know, things like body language, facial expressions, good, bad, indifferent, you know, the environment that people are in, and I'll try and pick up all sorts of signals there, and then file it and then utilize it maybe, you know, at a later date. Because I think, and I probably get that from team talks before matches, you know, you can pick up a lot from your team in terms of whether they're up for the game or not. And I carry that forward now into what we're doing today, really, when we meet with clients. You get a sort of a gauge of what they're like, what their aspirations are, how committed they are, or what their commitment levels might be, by asking obviously questions and listening to what they're saying. But I think the observational thing, matching the words with the body language is for me is quite key, because you can pick up a lot of interesting observations from doing that.
I'll add to that from a business point of view, which is that I'm a marketer by training. My MBA was in marketing. And it's absolutely vital that you listen to your market before you do anything. Because if you put yourself into your customer's shoes and find out, actually research and find out what it is that they want or like or do, you're in a much more powerful position to actually present whatever it is that you're presenting as what they want. And it's great dealing, as Jackie said, with clients. You get to understand people before you interact, almost before you interact with them, because you're in a much stronger position if you get what they're all about. And it's certainly true with people in the football world and people at any level, that if you make that effort to listen, you get a bank of information which you wouldn't otherwise get, which you can use. And there's nothing wrong with using it. But, you know, if you want to call it manipulation, I don't mind. But it gives you a toolkit to use in your dealings with that person. And absolutely, listening is something people probably don't value as much as they should, because they're rushing ahead with, you know, doing what they want to do and speaking their minds and not listening. And I think it's a shortcoming, really, to be single track like that.
Jackie, can I ask a quick just follow up on your point when you talk about being observational? Because one of the things that I've been thinking long and hard about is whenever I then have meetings and I'm trying to understand and listen and work out what the other person needs and try and then offer my input and provide value, whatever else it might be. When you're, for example, when you're in that dressing room environment where you were looking at body language, tone, manner, you know, verbal and non-verbal, and then you are computing all of those different types of observations. You know, my view when I'm doing that networking is I've got to write those down in terms of some type of longer idea. If I've got, you know, 200 or 300 contacts or clients and I'm meeting different people at different times saying they said this and this was interesting because of this, and then you can join a dot into here or otherwise. Was a lot of your observations, did they stay mental, i.e. were they building blocks that just developed in your brain, or at different times were you thinking this person is like this today, they've been like this otherwise, this is what I think their personality is more likely to be like, and that's how I need to approach them in a short term, medium term?
Yeah, I think you very much gauge, because every player has a different body language. They're all different. Some look as though they're really engaged, but not necessarily taking things in. some look completely disengaged but are taking everything in, and you get to know those personalities. And I think what you're able to do then in that situation, and also with clients, is you dial things up and down. So because what you don't want to do is you don't want, I mean, I call it mirroring in terms of clients. You don't want to be too bombastic if they're not, because you'll frighten the living daylights out of them. I think the team, sometimes the energy that you give and the energy that you get back, that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to level those two energy forces, if you like, so that, you know, you get the best out of that scenario. So I don't know how you measure that from a scientific point of view, but I think your inner core kind of gives you that signaling, if you like, to be able to, you know, dial up or down depending on the situation that you're in. And I think from a selling perspective, going back to, you know, my kind of days at GSK, they teach you so much over there. You know, you're just fed all this stuff, and somewhere you lock it into your brain, and then when you need it, you just pull it out and you just apply it in a practical sense. And I was very lucky to have so much learning and development thrown at me in such a large organization, that I've been able to transfer those skills into the football arena. And it's probably, I think a lot of my past players will say I was pretty unorthodox sometimes. And I didn't mind that, because that kind of meant, okay, I'm doing things the way that I feel should be done to get the results that I feel that we need to get. So not being afraid to step outside of that kind of what a normal manager would do was quite an entertaining side for me. And I think for many of my players as well, because it can become very mechanical, and somehow you want the personality to thrive, so that people, you know, as Carol said earlier, people buy people without a shadow of a doubt. And you've got to be able to flex that up and down, sideways, whatever, to whoever you're speaking to get the best possible outcome of that interaction. Not necessarily about you, not necessarily about them, but to have some form of productive outcome, really. And it doesn't have to be positive. Sometimes you can have outcomes that are, you know, negative, but they've been challenging and they have been productive in their own way.
Can I just ask one brief thing there, Jacquie, about unorthodox stuff that you do? Would you be able to give us an example of what the players or others considered unorthodox in certain approaches that you took, which were obviously different to the norm?
I think for me, it's probably around, obviously we've got the game strategy. It's around the unorthodox bits, really, around taking some examples out of the football arena into real life. So, you know, I would say something like around decision making. So I would say to my players, look, when you're making a decision, you know, it's like you're in a car on a motorway, you know, and you're just about to change lanes. You've got to be so, clear that you want to change lanes. You cannot faff around on a motorway. So they were mostly analogies around those kind of things. So I would just pull it out of football into the real world and then back into a football scenario. But they kind of got it, you know, oh yeah, okay, we need to be more decisive when we're making a pass or whatever the scenarios were. So, yep. And lots of other things, you know, they would expect me to go in at half time raging because, you know, they weren't playing very well. And I would go in as calm as anything and just talk to them as human beings. And then go out and just give, you know, a fantastic second half display. So I think that approach by, you know, always making sure that you don't always have the same approaches to an outcome that they think you're going to have. So they're expecting you to behave like this, and you behave the complete opposite way. I did that a lot. So when they thought they were playing well, they got absolutely, you know, in the changing room by me, and they would all look around like, hang on a minute, you know. And for me, it was around effort. It was always around effort, the level of effort. If the level of effort was good, they would be okay. If the level of effort was bad, they would not be okay.
And Carol, on the same point, on the similar point, just sorry if I reiterate it, when when as a manager, and you say as a generalist, but I think you're putting yourself down probably in that respect, when you were obviously interacting with a huge amount of people over the years, and your experience and expertise and skill set of managing those people and their verbal and non-verbal hints and tips to you, how best did you measure and gauge how best then to interact? Again, was it something that you practiced and got better at and that you retained quite well, or was this something that, you know, more forensically you were like, well, this person needs to do this, so I need to track these behaviors in a certain way and then deal with it in certain different ways?
I wish I could say there was a process such as you described, which is building a sort of visual map, if you like, of, you know, who did, how people reacted, and what approaches of yours were made for a successful outcome, and so you could store that. But I wasn't as organized as that. I think it's just something that happened, and it happened more as I got older, that I saw what worked. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with, you know, the University of Life. You know, you see what works, and you derive a kind of rule out of an objective rule out of subjective experiences. And Jackie, I'm pinching these words from Emma Hayes again. She gave a very good summary of, you know, her story. And she was asked by someone with a very sort of academic approach, you know, how did you do what you did? And she said, well, there is no methodology. So I have to deal with reality. I deal, like Jackie, obviously, with a lot of different people. And I see what works. And I started not knowing what works. And as, you know, time went on, I built up a rule of what did work, which I derived as a sort of something objective because it happens so often, but it grew out of subjective single experiences. And I think there is no methodology. I think there's just, like she said, working out what works with that person over time. You do need time for some of these things. They're not instant. They're not off a shelf and you can't buy a qualification in them. But yeah, I think that's probably the way I, as it were, recorded my, you know, what works experiences and could make use of them.
Very helpful. Conscious that it is almost 3:20 and we've been going. Really sorry to have kept you, but I hope you don't mind, because actually I've really enjoyed just chatting on these type of things. One more question, if that's all right, and then I'll let you go for the afternoon. It's probably around this idea of disappointments, resilience, and perseverance. I know these are quite broad concepts generally, but I'm quite interested, obviously, Jacquie, in your perceptions as someone that on a weekly basis, and sometimes in a more than a weekly basis, was dealing with, you know, the quite transparent winning, losing element of sport, but also more in terms of life and those type of life lessons. My thing about resilience is it's sometimes more difficult for me to talk about, because as much as I've had certain experiences, my background is such that I've been still from a middle class family in Liverpool that have afforded me certain privileges. So it makes it more difficult for me to, you know, effectively articulate, you know, how perseverant and resilient I need to be in certain ways compared to a lot of people in lots of different backgrounds or otherwise. And that's why, in a way, I'm trying to speak to lots of people about that. Obviously, that probably, I'd have thought for you, Jacquie, in your experience, has come right in the heart of a lot of weekly discussions, in a way. How do you, in the right way, minimize those type of things, but also master them, if that's the right way of saying it?
I think you broadly have to think about almost like a ribbon of life scenario, really, and go, okay, I've got so much time here to do X, Y, and Z, that you can't fester on things that perhaps, you know, have not been a nice experience for you. I think I've always been somebody to look to the horizon anyway. That's just what I do. And however you get there. But when you have setbacks in your life, I think it's important to reflect on them. I think it's important to feel any pain that you may have when you're going through them. You can't just ignore it. But I also think the quicker you get through it, the quicker you get out the other side, and the quicker you can get on to doing more productive things. So I think it's almost like a big slap around the face. It hurts at the time. You acknowledge it, but you don't stew in it. And you must get yourself up, dust yourself down, and get on with whatever you're trying to accomplish, really. Because of the ribbon of life, you don't have a lot of time, so you might as well try and you make it as small as possible, and you just move on. And that's the same for, if you lose a football game, it hurts, and in the manner that you lose it sometimes is really hurtful. But I think, and it's true, you get to that first training session after a loss and you started to forget about it anyway. So action, I think the short answer now is action. If you can get yourself action orientated after some bad experience, then that pulls you out of it, or pulls me out of it anyway.
Ribbon of life, very briefly, Jackie, what do you actually, I really quite like that phrase.
I use it as a motivator. So, you have a ribbon, you cut so much off for sleep, for this, and then you're left with your time to do your stuff. And it probably only looks about that long. So you kind of think to yourself, life is too short when you look at your ribbon. So you need to be able to maximize whatever time you've got doing whatever you do to the best that you can do it. So don't stew. Because every day it's running shorter and shorter and shorter. So you must make the most of life.
I'll support that.
Really?
In fact, when you asked about the, Daniel, when you asked about what slogan would we put up on a billboard, I was very naughty, and I said to Jackie, I know what I'll tell him. And I have to borrow this from an Irish pub owner up the road who put a big notice up in his garden. It wasn't a billboard, it was a big notice. It said, "Please do not read this notice." Which I thought was wonderful. But behind that rather flippant remark was the sort of thing Jackie was talking about. Life is very short. If you make mistakes or have a bad experience, don't look back, look forward and move on fast. So that would probably be the underlying thought about my flippant joke.
What do you add, and then just very briefly before I ask Jackie her last point as well, what do you actually think that flippant joke actually means in maybe a more stoic way, if that's the right way of putting it? Or what does it mean to you? Sorry, if maybe that's the better way.
Are you asking Jackie? Sorry.
No, you, Carol.
Sorry,
I'm
Carol.
sorry. I'm sorry. I was waiting.
Sorry,
for
no, I thought you were just.
You saw the billboard, Carol.
Oh, to me, it was entirely light-hearted. I linked the two because I just linked the two, but I just thought it was a piece of not metaphysics. It's a linguistic impossibility, like Hieronymus Bosch's pictures that don't actually your mind grapples with them but never gets anywhere because it's logically impossible. So it's logically impossible not to read the notice that says please do not read the notice. So I'm sorry, I linked it only. The flippancy was what linked to the serious point, not the actual meaning. I beg your pardon.
No.
Shouldn't have done that. But the serious point remains, which is life is short. Just move on. The disappointments, everything passes. Just move on. That's what
you could be stewing in something for far too long, and then it's something that could be a positive, a positive experience. So you don't want to be doing that. You want to go through as many things as you can, experience as much as you can, without something that that doesn't define who you are anyway.
Jacquie and Carol, thank you so much. I'm just going to press the recording. Give me 1 second and I'll just explain the